The media, yet again, showing its double standard while covering President Biden. You might have seen the video of the president falling off his bike over the weekend. It did go viral after all. He braked to speak with the crowd. He got his foot stuck in the pedal clip and he fell to the ground. He got right up, but it's not the first time Biden has had a physical mishap. You may remember he stumbled at least twice while climbing the stairs to board Air Force One. That was just 2 weeks ago. But still, the left-wing media took very little notice of Biden's bike fall, and they were quick to dismiss concerns about his age.
What's false is that he is not capable of doing the job right now, or he's not mentally in tune with the demands of the job. Anybody, any aide who engages with him, or reporters, we can see this. The gears of his mind are working. That's an issue pushed by right-wing media, but it's not correct.
But this, of course, is a far cry from the media response after President Trump appeared to walk down a ramp slowly after his commencement address at West Point some 2 years ago.
There's a lot of clues in there, but no conclusions. Is it balance problems? Is there some weakness there? Is there numbness in the feet, perhaps a type of neuropathy?
He exited the stage down what looked like a pretty typical ramp in a particularly slow and cautious manner.
If Trump can openly question the physical and mental fitness of his Democratic opponents, then when there is a moment where he looks frail or maybe ill, it's absolutely fair game to ask questions about his own well-being, particularly given his age, 74, and how little we know about his medical past.
I can't get over the comparison, Joe Concha, because I lived it. I was there. I was press secretary at the time. Who would have thought a slight hydroplane on a ramp would turn into health questions? Once upon a time, there was a ramp, there was West Point, and then the media went totally and completely nuts. But a bike fall, we will just write it off.
And when you're in business shoes, these things ain't easy to walk on when you're on ramps like that,
no.
Right? So the president at the time, of course, Trump was being cautious. I'm giving Biden a pass here in terms of falling here, given that I have done the same thing myself. When the clip is tighter, it's tricky to get off, boom, you go over, right? Now, all of that said, physically, I don't think there's too much wrong with Joe Biden in that sense, right? He could ride a bike. But I think mentally, I agree with the majority of the American people when you look at poll after poll, that he does not have the mental sharpness for the job. 2/3 of the country, in another poll, said that they think that he is too slow to respond to crises. And even when he had his fastball, right, if you want to even call it that, it was more like softball. But even when he had that, his instincts are profoundly wrong. And we see it now as president. When he says, guys, gals, that we have inflation at a 40-year high, and the way to lower that is to add trillions of spending on top of trillions, and then he says with a straight face that that will lower the deficit and lower inflation. Or when he blames the border on Donald Trump, that's an issue too. I could go down the line in terms of what he says and what he tries to execute and how profoundly wrong it is. That's the issue here, not falling off a bike, where that could have happened to anybody.
Yeah, Caitlyn, we have some receipts that I want to pull up. This is from Drew Holden. He does these epic threads that compare media headlines, and here are some of them. Okay, Trump, New York Times, this was the worst of them. Trump's halting walk-down ramp raises new health questions. The president also appeared to have trouble raising a glass of water to his mouth during a speech at West Point a day before he turned 74, the oldest the president has been in the first term until now, by the way. Then New York Times, same publication, Biden doing 100% fine after tripping while boarding Air Force One. Washington Post, Trump tries to explain his slow and unsteady walk. Same Washington Post, Biden stumbles climbing stairs to board Air Force One. CNN, why Donald Trump West Point ramp story actually matters. Biden is fine after falling off his bike in Delaware. I can assure you President Trump had no problems drinking glasses of water and doing 5 rallies in one day.
First of all, everybody here at Fox News, aren't we kind of used to all of this? Yeah. It's been going on for the last 10, 20 years, and it's only gotten worse. Like Joe, I ride bikes. I'm an avid biker. I've crashed on my bike. I've got my toe clip caught, and you stop, especially mountain biking where you're going over rocks and everything, and had a big crash, okay? It's not that. It's about his mental fitness, his mental energy. He just doesn't have it. He has a history of being wrong on every subject. He's been in politics for 50 years. He's been on the wrong side of every issue. And unfortunately, now he's president, where he's in a position where he has tremendous influence. And yes, the media does ignore it. But at this point, we're kind of used to it. I mean, we just have to continue our fight. We cannot just let these things happen anymore. We have to continue to expose to the people exactly what the truth is.
Yeah, and CNN had a truth over the weekend they chose to share, Harris. As presidential cat, Willow Biden has privileges. Hard-hitting reporting there from CNN.
Well, you know,
It is. Have we reached? Here's the question.
trying to reach a different
Yeah.
audience.
The question is, have we reached the tipping point?
Yeah.
You know, I keep asking that question. Have we reached that point where society and people look and see what's going on? I feel like we kind of have. I see changes happening, and I think that's a good thing.
I don't know about that. I'll tell you why. So the picture that I posted in my Twitter was I think it's an AP or Reuters picture. I can't recall. But the point of their reporting was so spot on. Look at how close all those people are to him. And then I took it further. I wanted to know, are the Secret Service the people with their hands on the president as he lies like a bug on its back? Right? So you're right. I cycled competitively in college. I wasn't very fast. But, you know, I had the Cannondale with the clip-ins. But from what I understand, he wasn't wearing clip-ins. He was wearing like little slide-ins, which there is a difference, because once you click in, it's hard to get out. So then my question was, well, why was Secret Service not out in front of him? This is the President of the United States. He tips over at an intersection, and the good graces of the people around him come to his rescue, because he kind of tipped over face first, right? The good graces of the people around him, great Americans coming to his rescue, and maybe there were undercover Secret Service that we don't know, but there are a lot of hands at that point reaching in to the president on his back like a bug. And I just think that if you have any doubt about where his agility or his mental acuity is, then you've got to have people out front for him. I mean, you've got to start protecting him now until whatever we wake up to. Caitlyn, you put that so well. I don't know if we've reached a tipping point.
Well, he has the media protecting him almost all of the time, at least, you know,
Maybe
not
they were the
physically, but
scum
yeah.
helping him.
Yeah. First of all, I'm so heartened to know that Olympic gold medalists fall too, because it makes me feel better about
Oh,
myself.
I've crashed. I just crashed recently. I had total knee replacement, so I finally, after like 16 years, been able to get back on my bike, and it's been great. But I've had like 2 falls already.
That makes me feel better, selfishly.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, but I'm okay.
But you're right. The apologist media, actually, the WSJ, the Wall Street Journal op-ed board, asks exactly that, which is this the tipping point? Because up until now, they argue it's essentially not done the Democratic Party or Biden any favors by covering up for and refusing to acknowledge all of these questions and concerns about his competency and ability and his age and all of those faculties. And they say, such is the price of nominating Mr. Biden with so little scrutiny about his capacity for the presidency. And they talk about what's going to happen in the fall, and they say, maybe there won't be a red wave. Maybe actually there'll be a wave for, if there is, that he's going to use the GOP as a foil and bounce back. But essentially, they say, up until now, covering up all of those questions, covering up the reality that Americans do not ignore, that we see with our own 2 eyes, has lent itself to a platform that they say they better start doing a better job of going outside of Washington to pick a potential candidate for 2024, because clearly the ones that are in D.C. are doing no one any favors, to include the vice president and Pete Buttigieg and everyone that's under the president that at this point can't even stay on his own 2 feet.
I love that you call him Booty Judge.
I don't try to. It comes out.
Oh, it's Buttigieg.
They allow
Edge.
There you go.
Yeah.
Would they even allow
Edge,
somebody from outside of Washington? The Democrats, they are such a tight little. Would they allow somebody from the outside in?
Probably
I don't
not.
think so.
Great question.
But one thing is clear, as my dad said, our president is a lost ball in tall grass.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.